Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Greenwald. I am the CEO of Greenwald Research, and I am here to speak with you today about issues around housing and homeownership in retirement. If you have not joined one of our coffee breaks before, welcome. Everyone, certainly grab your coffee, your tea, your water. We do these monthly, and the goal is to share some of the findings in the research we're doing that are interesting to us and our team here at Greenwald, and that we think would be valuable to all of you who are friends and allies of the firm. We are recording. The recording of this will be shared. It's also going to be on our website, as well as recordings from past coffee breaks. These are small group discussions, right? And I don't want this to be like the webinar where I'm just talking and maybe taking some chat Q&A at the end. We always encourage discussion, so feel free to pop off of mute, come on camera, ask questions, share your thoughts. I think especially this time, because what I'm hoping to share with you really is food for thought as opposed to a comprehensive set of findings from any one study. And it's a topic I've been thinking a lot about and I want to try and do more with. But I certainly want to start the conversation. So, what I'm sharing with you here is really just my hypotheses around housing decisions in retirement. I think that Americans' strong desire to age in their current homes may often not be the best decision from a financial, social, emotional, or physical and cognitive health standpoint. I think in financial planning and retirement planning, the home is probably not talked about enough because it's not an investable asset. And I do think as an industry that we need to pay more attention to these trends in home ownership that I'm going to share with you. Because whether or not we consider that asset investable, it is in fact the largest asset for most American households, and it's a pretty critical safety net. So I'm going to start with some background trends. This is from a study done by the National Association of Realtors. You may have seen articles sharing this because it was pretty big news. The median age of first-time home buyers is at an all-time high, 40 years old. The median age of all home buyers is 59 years old. People knocking on the door of retirement. And 21% of all buyers are first-time buyers. Now, there is some data that would suggest the age of first-time home buyers is actually closer to 35. Even if you look at that, though, that 35 number is an all-time high for that data set. Everything is trending upward, right? To get into that first home buyers put down 10% median, and that's the highest they've put in apparently since 1989. And to do that, 26% use financial assets such as a 401k, stocks, or cryptocurrency. Now, most of us know that ownership of stock and cryptocurrency is probably pretty small, which means the vast majority of that 26% is pulling from their 401k to buy their first home. I mentioned this is such an important asset. Here, this is some data from Pew. Have a lot of respect for them. The primary residence, typically home equity of 174,000. Their research shows the typical retirement account at 76,000. So home equity is nearly twice retirement savings, more than twice, I should say, retirement savings. Interestingly, Pew found that 8 in 10 households have one of these assets, but only 44% have both of them. Struck me as a little low. This is data from the Retirement Confidence Survey 2026 that Greenwald conducts annually with EBRI. Our numbers would suggest that 63% of workers and 76% of retirees own their home. That's close to numbers we see from census, which would suggest about 65% of all Americans own their home. However, you may or may not have seen last month a whole flurry of articles because some new calculations from the Fed came out, and they are painting a more dire picture of home ownership in America, lowering that number from 65% to 53% of all US adults owning their home. Now, it's sort of an interesting research issue that the Fed uncovered. It was really about how the question of home ownership was asked. What they thought was a flaw in the way census was collecting the data was that someone might say they live in a home that is owned, but not necessarily owned by them. So figure your 27-year-old child comes back and lives at home while they get on their feet or while they go to grad school. That child, that adult child, is saying, yes, I live in a home that's owned. Census is counting them as a homeowner, but in fact, they're not. Their parents own the home, they don't. And so what the Fed found in their new calculation was actually adult children accounted for the biggest discrepancy in the two numbers. And so homeownership, according to that new calculation, is hovering at just about half of the adult population in the US. But people love their homes once they're in them. So on the right in RCS, we asked our workers, do you plan to sell your primary residence? We asked our retirees, did you? By and large, very few people plan to sell their primary residence, or did, in fact, to help with retirement needs. However, they don't want to sell their primary residence, but 58% of workers are expecting some type of real estate to produce income for them in retirement. Only 33% of retirees say that's actually the fact. So whether it's their own home, home equity, real estate, their primary or investment, rental income, there's a pretty big gap in expected income. Workers saying they're going to get income this way, and retirees saying they're really not, by and large, or at least most are not. We usually talk about with RCS the gap in income from work for pay. But this is a pretty big one too. And it reflects, I think, a fascination with real estate as an investment that we've heard and seen in other research, especially among younger consumers. And in RCS, we asked our workers and retirees, in preparation for retirement, have you or did you consider the impact of your housing type and your geographic location on your retirement? And an equal 62% of each group said yes. Now, I'm doubtful, right? I think maybe they gave it a brief thought. They said, yeah, I'm going to stay right here in my house. And that was it. They moved on. I doubt that it was critically thought through in terms of what's the best financial decision? What's the best social emotional decision? What's the best decision for my physical and my cognitive well-being as I age? That's one of my hypotheses, not that well thought through. The flip side of that is retirees in RCS generally say they are satisfied and having the lifestyle in retirement that they envisioned. So maybe they did make the right choice for them. I was curious about the advisor side of all of this as well. So we recently did just a quick poll of our insiders, which is Greenwald's proprietary research panel of financial professionals. And I asked them, to what extent does making the right decisions about where to live impact your client's overall satisfaction with retirement? 96% said it impacts it somewhat or a great deal, half saying a great deal. I think we all agree this is a pretty critically important decision for retirement. And then I weighed that against a data point I saw last year in Greenwald's Retiree Insights program, where we do a survey of more affluent pre-retirees and retirees and a survey of advisors. And in that survey last year, we heard only 42% of financial advisors discuss housing plans with their clients. And we gave them that little description below. So I wanted more detail. And in this newer poll, I tried to get a little bit more detail. So what we see here is most advisors, 58%, saying they often or always talk to their clients about staying in their current home versus moving or downsizing. But it looks like the conversation stops there because only 33% go on to talk to their clients about using the sale of their primary home to fund other goals and needs. And there's interesting parallel between this 33% and the 33% of retirees who actually sold their home. Um, just an interesting curiosity there. I also asked these advisors how often they hear clients say they want to age in place and stay in their current home. And not a huge surprise, they hear that a lot, right? 82%. So they often or always hear their clients express a wish to age in their current home, stay at home. But what I asked them next was, how often do you think that's a mistake? Because of financial, social, emotional, or physical health. Now, 20% of them, which isn't too bad, said it's often or always a mistake that their clients want to age in place. But another 56% said it is sometimes a mistake. So, presumably, a professional, more objective looking at this decision to age in place and stay in the home is saying maybe it wasn't thought through. Oftentimes it feels like a mistake, or at least sometimes it feels like a mistake. And I
Well, of
do think
course,
advisors, yeah, come on, Nevin.
just as many said more actually said rarely. So we don't want to
Yeah,
gloss over that.
I
Hmm.
don't. So, yeah, so it's 20% on the high end, it's 23% on the low end.
Yeah.
But if that sometimes is 50-50, my clients are making a mistake, that's a good number of clients making a mistake.
What do you think that mistake, what would constitute a mistake? Like they can't deal with stairs anymore, they can't afford their mortgage. I mean, it could be a lot of things, right?
It could be a lot of things. I mean, I would presume, which is dangerous always, that a financial advisor is first and foremost thinking of it as a financial decision. So maybe they think it is a financial mistake to not move and downsize. But the way I phrased this question for them included that social emotional reason as well as the physical health reason. So it may just be that advisors don't think their clients are thinking this through thoroughly.
Yeah. Um, let me comment to Eric's comment and the whatever it did in the and
Yeah.
I will acknowledge that I'm aberrant. We actually did think about mobility issues because we had a three-level house that was
Hmm.
meant to accommodate us and our three kids and our four dogs. And we were already seeing issues with my wife with stairs, which we tried to let out our four dogs into their backyard.
Hmm.
So we literally, when we moved and chose a new place to live, we looked for like single level kind of stuff. We took that into account before it was a problem because we said, well, one of these days we can't live here forever. Why don't we do this now while we don't have mobility problems? So again, I may be an outlier, but we
I,
actually did think about it.
Nevin, I think you probably are an outlier.
Well, we
Hopefully
know
the
that.
folks on this call will think about things a little differently than the average advised consumer. Um, and
Well,
I'm not
it helped
saying,
us too. We unlike a lot of people, we weren't living in the same house where we raised our children, if you will. We'd had a couple of moves along the way, so we weren't
yeah.
anchored in the same way that many families are. I don't have a kid living 2 miles from me who has little babies that, I'm going to go see. So we had different dynamics.
One thing that I've been thinking about is, age-friendly cities and the criteria for age-friendly cities. And I'm willing to bet most Americans don't think through all of those issues, access to healthcare, distance to family and friends and social networks, right? And so to me, this just says it's not being talked about enough, right? There's a knee-jerk reaction. I want to stay at home. And then sort of the end of the conversation is what I suspect.
Yeah,
But
I
the
don't
other thing,
disagree.
yeah, the other thing we asked advisors was, do you have tools for you to use with clients to help with these decisions? A little over half said yes, but three-quarters said they wanted better ones. So advisors perhaps don't feel equipped to have and prompt these conversations and help their clients think through these decisions critically. I found that really important as well.
What kind of tools would you think would be useful?
I would imagine it could run the gamut, honestly. Like if I were to test this in a separate survey, which I'd love to do, hint, hint, wink, wink, um, I'd want to test things like calculators. If you stay at home, what is your monthly housing expense going to be, factoring in routine, or maybe it's annual is the better way to do it, but factoring in routine maintenance, possible changes or accommodations to the home if there are mobility issues, right? Like maybe something to show the true cost of aging in place. Um, I think it could be something that's a lot more like a psychological assessment, right? Like where do you need to be in retirement to feel happy and fulfilled? Maybe it's all of those things. Maybe it's just a checklist of have you thought about what happens if? Um, so I don't know the detail on what advisors currently have. But I could envision and gladly test a whole lot of things that I think might be helpful for them to have and be showing to their clients.
Yeah, I think so. And the reason I asked the question, because again, when we were thinking about all of this process and things like that, we were some of the things you've mentioned. We look. I mean, for instance, we took into account. We were looking at like tax environment. We looked at access to healthcare. We looked at access to like social events, cultural stuff. So,
Hmm.
for instance, we picked being fairly close to a university town that would have
Yep.
some of that stuff. We did not take into account things like mass transit,
Hmm.
for instance, and I'm sure I'll pay for that one day. It's getting harder and harder to get in and out of my Mustang. But but those maybe it's just to your point, maybe it's just a checklist of just kind of have you thought about these kind of things? Because I do think once you've been in one place, lived in one place, grown up there, if you will, for like 20 or 30 years, you probably take some of that stuff for granted.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we were very concerned about things like access to healthcare
Yeah.
because you just figure you're going to need more of that than you have. So,
It's definitely like not the first time like we hear in focus groups the mention of university towns a lot
mhm. which
because
which
of
also
what
has
they
some
have to
downsides
offer.
too, by the way. There's upsides and there's downsides.
Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, please, everyone jump on. This is really the end of my slides for the most part. I'm just sort of kicking around this idea, right? Like my thought looking at this series of stuff is, um, you know, we don't question or challenge the decision to stay in place enough, right? As families, as advisors, as an industry. It's not to say it's the wrong decision, but we don't walk people through it in a objective, critical thinking way, most of the time, from what I can gather so far. And considering it really is the biggest asset, we should be. We should be. It's really important. Um, and the advisors want better tools for this, right? And some of those tools arguably can and should be made available to the unadvised as well, right? No reason checklists couldn't be available to a broader audience than just the advised. But I think advisors are uniquely positioned um, when given the chance to help think through those decisions. Um, and I think we can probably help more people view their home as an asset earlier on in the process, that it may be able to help fund other goals and needs because we still believe that most Americans are under saving. So curious about other people's thoughts. I see a little bit in the chat. There are books that do this. That's true. I don't think most people use books to plan for their retirement. They should. Um, Maybe we make those more accessible.
I think that one thing that people often don't really think through is the investment income they can get off of the value of their home. If they sell the home, then that A is a source of, of income that is not taxed. They could use some of that equity and reduce tax, and there might be other advantages in terms of cost of Medicare. And also, just how much they can earn on that money, which I think we don't know what the value of the home is growing at, but I think it is likely that they get more of investable income. They can get an increase in home value. Further, I don't think advisors really have provided that much help in the decision about if one should rent or buy if they sell their home. That's an interesting financial lifestyle decision. And I just want to throw out one other idea. I think a wild card is all of the new types of housing that's being developed. It's pretty attractive for older people. These apartments and communities that have a doctor on staff, that have all these social programs, that have, restaurants in the apartment that are designed for older people. And I think there's going to be continued development there in that area that might be an interesting magnet or pull to people out of their homes. So
Yeah, there's like a whole set of illustrations. If you do this, if you do that, like, but we don't treat it that way, right? We just don't, as an industry, treat it that way. We'll illustrate all sorts of other things, but not this. And I want to acknowledge Eric on the Greenwald team mentioned climate change, and that's a really important one too. How many retirees want to go, somewhere warm, except that somewhere warm is prone to hurricanes and flooding and beach erosion. You even have issues with rivers. You want to live on the water anywhere these days. Good luck. Um, so there are a lot of considerations because that will raise your costs. Yeah, Lily, hi.
Thank you so much for this really informative coffee break. I'm not going to go on camera because it's August and it's humid and I'm in Washington, D.C., so it's
It's
about
all
here a
right.
month.
It's true.
But it's germane to the question of Washington, D.C. Friends and I have been told by various realtors that the condo market in this city specifically is flat. And then someone else piped in, oh, it's all over the United States. So for lay people trying to be informed consumers, did we miss like reading something? Because there are demographic trends. The last knowledge that we had was, oh, people are going to sell their $1 million homes in the suburbs and move downtown. But all of a sudden, prices have tanked. So, as informed consumers, was there something that we could have read, blogs or whatever, that anyone on here would like to suggest to sort of learn about trends? Because I think many neighbors and I were thinking of an old model. So, thank you so much.
It almost strikes me that the missed opportunity is if you were going to downsize to a condo, now's the time to do it. because we do have a soft condo market right now here in DC. Um, yeah, I mean, I just don't think holistically as an industry, whether it's blogs or articles or advisors, like this, it gets ignored far too often. Far too often.
Well, on the flip side of that, yours truly managed to sell his home in Northern Virginia, and in the process, made enough profit. This gets a little bit to what Matt was saying to wipe out mortgage. So my budgeting
Right.
calculations for post-retirement, we took mortgage payments right off the line with that
Yeah.
move, plus a better cost of living. Of course, there are lots of places in the world that are better cost of living than Northern Virginia. So, you know.
There are a lot of options here and a lot of factors.
I could just
I'm
jump
not
in.
someone who could create an illustration, but Lord, now that I think about it, wouldn't that be helpful?
Yeah, I think we have a few different populations to think about here. So the advised population, I'm least worried about, right? Because they have safety nets. So if they're not thinking about housing in the most optimal way, they'll figure it out and they have the ability to do so. Then you have people that own their own home, but they don't have an advisor, maybe not doesn't have access to one. Um, I don't think they have access to good information to help them make those decisions. And then, of course, there are people who don't own a home at all and don't have any of these options. There was some data that came out this week, and I wish I saved it because I saw it on LinkedIn, but I'll try to find it if I can. But somebody shared some statistics about the reasons that people cannot age in place, and the results were somewhat surprising. Um, but I've got to go back and find it. It was just this week. So
And there are a couple other things that have popped up in my mind as I'm really starting to think about this issue a little bit more myself. I mean, one is while we hope and think Social Security will get fixed somehow, if it doesn't, right,
Hopefully not like my
the
dog.
the um the home really could in a lot of ways be thought of as the third leg of the stool. Um, which becomes especially problematic if we have younger generations who will never own a home, right? Those new Fed numbers, one of the things that stuck out for me was they lowered that for all American adults, 53% own a home, but the number for Americans under 35 who own a home was 22%. Now, they haven't hit that magic 40 years old age yet. But if we have a whole generation with much lower home ownership, they don't have that safety net, right? And that's going to impact their financial well-being throughout their lives, likely. And it may impact their retirement assets and resources.
I keep seeing situations though that indicate that older folks have done so much refinancing on their mortgages. It's not like they're sailing into retirement with paid off mortgages
Well,
either.
right, right. We had a good
So,
number even of our, oh, let me see if I can click back. A good number of our retirees said they still had a mortgage.
yeah,
25%
yeah.
of our retirees still had their mortgage. Yeah. And we know from other RCS data that they're going into retirement, retirees are reporting higher levels of non-mortgage debt as well.
And I figured that 27-year-old who was living in the basement who said he lived in an owned home was probably counting on his parents leaving it too. So,
Right, think about what that does to the parents and their retirement
yeah.
finances. I mean, there's a lot here to unpack, for sure. But I appreciate you all kind of spitballing this with me, hearing me out. Maybe Maybe we'll come up with some additional interesting findings to share with you in the future.
There's another piece of this that I kept bringing when I was at Ebury. I kept bringing up, but there's just no good way to get the sampling on. That is, um, where these average retirement savings numbers that everybody puts out, setting aside their
Mhm.
averages and all that kind of stuff. Those numbers, where you live and the cost of living where you
Right.
live, really change the dynamic. And I think most of the people in the major media centers and in DC, they look at those numbers, they're like, there's no way anybody could live on
Sure.
those numbers. But the reality is, as we've seen, everybody keeps saying, well, where are the soup lines? Where's the problem? Stuff like that. In a lot of parts of this country, you can live on a lot less money comfortably. And that gets back to why the retirees feel so, comfortable. And everybody keeps thinking, well, how can they possibly be comfortable? And it's that distortion. So I think location matters, and I think your points here on like where you, not only where you live but how you live where you live, that really has an impact. And again, the sampling sizes are going to make it impossible to do something like that at a national level. But as a footnote, as an acknowledgement that these kind of things aren't able to take that kind of stuff into consideration, I wish people would bear that in mind when we hit the panic button and scratch our heads and say, how could this possibly not be a problem? Well, it might not be a problem for everybody. It's definitely a problem for some people. So,
Right. Right. The assessment of savings sufficiency is location dependent. And I mean, given there are a lot of us here in the DC area, like that 176 median home equity, right? Like that shows you there are parts of the country where where home prices and housing decisions look very different. But it is all relative.
which is why when people see the headlines in the middle of the country about like the salaries of the congressmen and stuff, to
Right.
them, those look like ginormous numbers. Yet trying to live in DC on those salaries is crazy. Um,
Right.
so, yeah, it's people just don't have the full perspective to put some of these things in context. Anyway,
Well, we are at time. I'm going to send you all off to enjoy your August Friday and weekend. Try and stay out of the humidity, though that's a little difficult around here. Thanks again for attending, and if we can be of any assistance, let us know.